She slides a worn folder across the table, her gaze fixed on some distant point, refusing to meet my eyes. "They shouldn't exist anymore," she murmured, her voice a mere breath. "They requested all copies be destroyed during the investigation, but I kept one. I've been waiting, hoping someone would finally ask the right questions." Inside lay the original whistleblower statement from Dr. Clara Mason, detailing horrific experimental treatments inflicted upon female patients labeled with defiant personality disorder or hysterical tendencies. Women who dared to question authority, who simply refused to comply. These treatments, designed to crush their spirits and force them into docile acceptance of established hierarchies, sent a chill down my spine. Back in my cramped room at Pinewood Apartments, I unfolded one of Mr. Henderson's donation envelopes from the esteemed Hope Foundation. The return address, stark in blue ink, felt like a pointed accusation. The very same logo adorned my mother's commitment papers, alongside the chillingly familiar signature of Mr. Henderson Collins, authorizing the seemingly endless financial arrangements for Dr. Clara Mason's therapeutic residency. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. 3 days later, Mrs. Gable found me hunched over dusty tomes in the library basement. Her arthritic hands, gnarled like ancient roots, twisted nervously in her lap. "They're not in the system," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the stairwell as if expecting unseen watchers. "When Stonemeyer shut down, some patients were relocated. Special cases, not in any public database." With a trembling hand, she slid a hand-drawn map across the table. A treacherous, winding road snaking through dense woodland, leading to an ominously unmarked turnoff, and finally, a facility named Rock Creek Behavioral Center. "Security badge only," she added, her voice barely audible. "Minimal staff, maximum containment." A shiver traced its way down my spine. That night, fueled by a desperate hope and a gnawing fear, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic along the unmarked access road. Tree branches clawed at the windows like skeletal warning fingers. After what felt like an eternity of 3 miles shrouded in dense, isolating woods, the facility loomed into view. A sprawling, foreboding stone structure, with narrow, prison-like windows and a chain-link perimeter crowned with razor wire. A solitary guard booth stood sentinel at the entrance, and a small, discreet sign identified it as Rock Creek Behavioral Center, private property, no trespassing. Was she in there? Had she been trapped within those cold stone walls all these years, a mere 2 hours from the house where I grew up, a place filled with hollow memories? I parked on the shoulder, a 1/4 of a mile away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Through my binoculars, I studied the building with a growing sense of dread. Cameras, like unblinking eyes, were positioned at every corner. The staff parking lot held only about 20 cars. A loading dock sat still, where a pharmacy delivery truck had likely unloaded its grim cargo of unmarked containers. This wasn't a place designed for healing. It was a fortress built for containment. My mother was behind those walls. I felt it in the deepest recesses of my being. The question wasn't if I would get her out. The question was how far I would descend into the darkness to dismantle the system that had swallowed her whole, and the people who had built their comfortable lives on her agonizing silence, starting with the man I had called Dad for 17 long years. The cheap bathroom mirror in my dingy hostel room reflected a stranger staring back at me. Chestnut hair dye stained the chipped porcelain sink like a gruesome reminder of my transformation. I practiced my carefully constructed cover story under my breath, my gloved hands massaging the dark color into my scalp. Angela Weber, social work student, thesis on long-term care environments. The words felt foreign and stiff on my tongue, despite 2 weeks of relentless rehearsal. My forged student ID and visitor application lay on the sticky countertop beside a spiral notebook filled with unnecessarily detailed research questions, a deliberate attempt to appear innocuous. People rarely questioned those who seemed official and, frankly, boring. The 40-minute drive to Rock Creek on those winding back roads felt like a descent into the abyss. The facility finally emerged from the oppressive woodland. A sprawling brick structure with narrow windows and a rusted iron gate that seemed less an entrance and more a barrier designed to keep the forgotten in. My pulse hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I approached the visitor entrance, but I plastered a mask of detached professionalism onto my face. The receptionist, a woman with hollow eyes that seemed to have witnessed too much, barely glanced at my credentials, her gaze scanning my forged documents with a chillingly mechanical indifference. "Purpose of visit?" she asked, her voice as flat and lifeless as stale soda. "Research interview with patient Camille Mercer for my thesis on institutional care environments." With a steady hand that belied the tremor in my soul, I handed her the official-looking approval letter I had painstakingly created, complete with convincingly forged signatures. She stamped a visitor pass with a dull thud and buzzed me through the heavy door without a second glance. The antiseptic smell hit me first, a harsh, sterile blend of bleach and industrial cleaner, doing its best to mask something far more sinister lurking beneath. The soft, shuffling echo of feet drifted down the corridor in a steady, unsettling rhythm as patients moved between their scheduled activities, flanked by emotionless attendants clutching clipboard charts. The visiting area was a bleak space, dotted with scattered tables bolted to the floor, each separated just enough to prevent any semblance of private conversation. A hulking guard stood by the only exit, the jangling of keys on his belt a constant low-level threat. And then I saw her. My mother sat by the window, her frail hands folded delicately in her lap. Wispy strands of graying hair were pulled back in a loose, pathetic knot. Weak sunlight filtered through the wire-reinforced glass, illuminating motes of dust that danced around her like tiny, lost souls. Her vacant gaze followed nothing in particular, lost in some internal landscape I couldn't comprehend. My carefully researched notes hadn't prepared me for how utterly small she looked, how fragile. I approached slowly, my footsteps feeling thunderous in the oppressive silence, and deliberately placed my notebook on the table with what I hoped appeared to be academic calm. "Dr. Mercer, I'm Angela Weber. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Her eyes didn't focus immediately, and a sickening realization washed over me. The medication. They kept her perpetually adrift, somewhere between reality and a drug-induced haze. I sat down across from her, acutely aware of the guard's watchful presence, his periodic glances at his watch, a stark reminder that time was a precious commodity here. According to the schedule I had memorized, medication rounds happened at 10 o'clock a.m. and 2 o'clock p.m. It was currently 11:30 a.m., a fleeting window when some patients experienced a brief, fragile clarity. "I'm researching long-term care environments," I continued, my voice deliberately loud enough for any eavesdroppers, then leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, a desperate plea escaping my lips. "Mom, my name is Maya." Her eyes sharpened suddenly, the pupils contracting as if a veil had been lifted. Her frail fingers trembled as they reached toward my face, stopping just inches short of contact, as if an invisible barrier still held her captive. "They said you would forget me," she whispered, her voice raspy and rough from disuse, each word a painful testament to her isolation. "That you'd be safer that way." The simple act of recognition, that flicker of awareness in her eyes, splintered something in my chest. 16 years of forced separation dissolved by 5 quiet, heart-wrenching words. "I remember enough," I answered, my own voice thick with unshed tears, opening my notebook as a flimsy shield against the guard's ever-present gaze. Camille's gaze darted nervously towards the guard, then back to me, a silent plea in her eyes. "We have 20 minutes before Lawrence makes his rounds. He thinks I'm responding well to the new dosage." I nodded, forcing my expression to remain neutral despite the storm of emotions raging behind my ribs. "Tell me what happened," I urged, my voice tight with anticipation and dread. "Behavioral conditioning experiments at Stonemer Meyer," she murmured, her face settling into the placid, almost vacant mask of someone long institutionalized. "Hale, they called them breakthrough treatments for treatment-resistant patients." Her voice, though weak, held a chilling undercurrent as she described the mental tortures disguised as therapy. Sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, experimental drugs administered without consent, the calculated selection of difficult women, single mothers, former addicts, abuse survivors, whose complaints would be conveniently dismissed. I was department head of psychiatry. I found the files, patient suicides classified as treatment failures. Her words tumbled out faster now, a torrent of truth breaking through decades of enforced silence. I confronted Martin, filed reports. 3 days later, she was committed, declared delusional by colleagues she had trusted. Your father, he arranged everything, she said. And for a fleeting moment, confusion clouded my vision before the horrifying realization struck me. She meant Gregory Collins. He handled the financial transfers, the paperwork for your custody arrangement, called it protective intervention. My pen hovered shakily above my notebook, my hand trembling uncontrollably. The man I had called father for 17 years had personally orchestrated my mother's imprisonment and my own removal from her life. A wave of nausea washed over me. I noticed Camille's right hand sliding stealthily beneath the thin cushion of her chair. With a subtle movement, she extracted a small notebook bound in faded blue fabric, passing it beneath the table to me. I've documented everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. 17 years of treatments, staff rotations, medication protocols. They assume the drugs make me compliant. They never searched hard enough. The journal disappeared into my bag, a tangible piece of my mother's stolen life, as I stared at this woman who had never surrendered, despite the chemical restraints and soul-crushing isolation, who had somehow managed to keep her mind intact through systematic attempts to destroy it. There's a nurse, Camille continued, her eyes holding a flicker of hope. Margot Bell. She left last year but still visits former patients. Officially, she brings cookies and magazines. Unofficially, she knows what they're doing here. I memorized the name instantly, my mind already racing with possibilities. How do I find her? Service entrance. Thursdays at 4 o'clock. Tell her I sent you. Camille's eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway where a medication cart had just appeared. Our time's almost up. I rose, gathering my notebook with hands that trembled despite my attempt to appear composed, the very foundations of my understanding of the world crumbling beneath me. I'll come back, I vowed, my voice thick with emotion. I know, she replied, her expression softening for the first time, a fragile smile gracing her lips. You have my eyes. 3 days later, I stood by the dimly lit service entrance of Rock Creek, my collar turned up against the biting autumn wind that carried the scent of approaching rain. At precisely 4 o'clock, a woman in her late 50s approached, carrying a woven basket covered with a checkered cloth. Margot Bell? I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. She froze, her keys halfway to the lock. A deep weariness etched into her rigid posture. Camille Mercer sent me. The weariness in her eyes instantly transformed into fear, then a weary resignation. I've waited years for someone to ask the right questions, she finally said, her voice low and strained. But not here. Meet me at Lakeside Diner in an hour. At the sticky booth of the Lakeside Diner, over lukewarm burnt coffee, Margot placed a small flash drive beside my saucer. Medication records, unauthorized protocols, security schedules, she murmured, her voice barely carrying over the clatter of dishes and the murmur of other patrons. Your mother wasn't the only one, but she was the one they feared most. My fingers closed around the cool metal of the drive as I slipped it into my pocket, a volatile mix of fear and fury churning beneath my carefully controlled expression. There's more, she said, pushing a thick manila folder across the table. These were harder to access. Inside were pediatric medical records, my medical records, years of preventative treatments administered during routine checkups, experimental compounds disguised as innocent vitamins and vaccines, each form bearing Gregory Collins's damning signature. Understanding crystallized in my veins, sharp and cold as ice. My unexplained childhood illnesses, the monthly doctor visits, the pills I swallowed every morning with breakfast that Jean had insisted were just to keep you healthy, sweetheart. It all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. There are others, Margot said quietly, her gaze filled with a sorrowful understanding. Children of whistleblowers, all placed in protective custody with carefully selected guardians. all receiving specialized medical care. I stared at the pages documenting the chemical alteration of my developing brain, the meticulous monitoring for any signs of maternal instability, patterns, years of being medicated against an inheritance of courage they had labeled as madness. The rage that surged through me was not a fiery inferno, but a cold, precise fury, like a surgeon's scalpel. "This ends now," I told Margot, my voice steady despite the seismic shift occurring within me. All of it, as I walked back to my car. The weight of the truth pressing down on me, I made a silent vow. A vow to the mother who had never stopped fighting, even in the deepest darkness, and to the child I had been, who had never understood the subtle fog in her mind, the dreams that always remained just beyond her grasp. They hadn't just stolen my mother. They had methodically attempted to erase her from me, cell by cell, synapse by synapse. But they had failed. The cracked bathroom mirror at the Pinewood hostel, a jagged line running from one corner to the other, seemed to mock my fractured reality. I traced the fissure with my finger, watching my reflection split into two distinct figures. The compliant person I had been raised to be, and the determined woman I was rapidly becoming. 3 weeks I had lived in this transient place, and I had claimed the cramped corner room as my war room. Behind me, the peeling wallpaper bloomed with a chaotic collage of evidence. Newspaper clippings, photocopied documents, handwritten notes, all interconnected by a tangled web of red string. My makeshift investigation board had devoured nearly every last dollar I had. But money had become a meaningless abstraction when measured against 16 years of stolen time. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the intricate timeline I had painstakingly constructed. Whistleblowers at Stonemer silenced with disturbing regularity. Psychiatric commitments following inconvenient allegations. Children placed in protective custody with guardians who were handsomely compensated. Each damning thread, each painful connection, led back to the Hope Foundation and to Gregory Collins, the man who had called himself my father while coldly cashing checks to ensure my silence. Camille's coded journal lay open on the worn bed beside my ancient laptop. For 7 straight nights, I had toiled, transcribing her meticulous script, painstakingly deciphering the simple substitution cipher she had devised to document the unthinkable. Medication dosages inexplicably increased before board inspections, patients abruptly transferred in the dead of night, staff members who dared to question protocols suddenly reassigned or quietly terminated. The ancient radiator clanked and hissed, pushing tepid, stale air into the cramped room, a pathetic imitation of warmth. I checked my watch. Almost time. Outside the grimy diner window, traffic crawled through the relentless afternoon rain. I had chosen this place specifically, crowded enough to afford a semblance of anonymity, noisy enough to mask hushed conversations, and crucially, 3 exits in case of trouble. The woman across from me, her face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own, stirred her coffee for the 3rd time without taking a sip. "I tried to tell this story 10 years ago," Tessa Monroe said finally. Her eyes, though lined with fatigue, held a sharp, unwavering intelligence. She scanned the damning documents I had placed between us. A former investigative journalist, blacklisted and professionally exiled after daring to pursue corruption allegations in Tsog against politically connected figures. Tessa was my 7th attempt at finding the right ally. The previous 6 had believed my story, but had lacked either the courage or the platform to help me fight. "What happened?" I asked, though my own research had already painted a grim picture. Sudden tax audit. Mysterious computer failures that wiped out years of research. Sources who suddenly denied ever speaking to me. She tapped a long, elegant finger against the photocopied photo of Dr. Hale. They didn't just discredit me, they erased me professionally. Yet here she was. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but a grim acknowledgement of the shared fight. Some stories never let you go, even after they try to destroy you. With a determined gesture, I pushed Camille's photocopied journal pages toward her. "This time," I said, my voice firm, "we have evidence they can't erase." She studied the fragile pages, her professional mask slipping for just a moment, revealing a raw empathy. Your mother was brilliant. Even heavily medicated, she built a case. We spent the next hour meticulously developing our distribution plan. Multiple outlets, never relying on just one. Independent podcasts focusing on medical ethics and institutional abuses. Former prosecutors now working in patient advocacy. Journalists operating outside the suffocating constraints of traditional media structures. Individual packages, Tessa explained, sketching a diagram on a stained napkin. Each one gets unique documentation with separate access codes. No single target will have everything. A dead man's switch protocol, I added, understanding immediately the gravity of the situation. She nodded, a flicker of something akin to respect crossing her features. We're not just telling the truth, she said, her voice low and resolute. We're making it too loud to bury. I returned to the dilapidated hostel after dark to find Gregory standing in the shabby lobby, his expensive charcoal suit jarringly out of place against the worn furniture. The night manager, a man whose eyes held the weary resignation of someone who had seen too much and cared too little, looked almost apologetic as I approached. Maya, Gregory said, his practiced lawyer voice perfectly modulated despite the barely concealed tension in his jaw. We need to talk. With deliberate slowness, I led him to the dimly lit common room, pointedly choosing a spot directly beneath the flickering security camera in the corner. He noticed my strategic positioning, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Your mother had certain unstable genetics. Teep, he began, his fingers fiddling with his perfectly knotted tie. We've protected you from that heritage, these delusions you're pursuing. How did you even find me? I cut through his practiced monologue, the years of carefully constructed lies crumbling before my very eyes. His momentary silence spoke volumes. They're watching me, aren't they? Tracking my every move. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. The police contacted me today, I told him calmly, watching his reaction. They're concerned about my behavior. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, but his lawyer's mask quickly snapped back into place. Interesting timing. His expression remained carefully neutral, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his expensive leather portfolio. That evening, a stark text message flashed on my burner phone from Margot. Security doubled at Rock Creek. Night transfer scheduled. They're moving patients, hiding evidence. Someone accessed my library account yesterday. The automated email notification, a chilling confirmation of their paranoia, made my blood run cold. My carefully constructed timeline, once a source of meticulous planning, suddenly felt agonizingly slow, dangerously methodical. 3 days later, the first domino fell. The Medical Ethics Podcast released their explosive interview with an anonymous insider, strategically timed alongside Camille's own haunting audio recordings, detailing the horrific experimental protocols. By noon, screenshots and sound bites were circulating like wildfire across social media. Local reporters, sensing a major story, began making inquiries. Anonymous tips from former Rock Creek employees started trickling in, each horrifying account validating our carefully gathered evidence. The hostile motel manager, his usual sneer replaced by a nervous apprehension, stopped me at the stairs that evening, his voice low and conspiratorial. 2 men asking questions about you today. Showed badges, but wouldn't leave cards. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach, but beneath it, a fierce determination ignited. I texted Tessa immediately. We need to accelerate our timeline. By morning, I had relocated to a spare apartment belonging to one of Tessa's trusted friends, my few worldly possessions crammed into my worn backpack. The first major news outlet had picked up the story, the headline screaming across my laptop screen. The Hope Foundation, cornered and desperate, issued a terse statement denying all allegations, branding them a coordinated smear campaign. But their carefully crafted denial rang hollow against the gathering wave of damning evidence we had unleashed. Too many voices were speaking now, their stories echoing each other with chilling consistency. Too many documents pointed to the same undeniable conclusion. The truth wasn't just emerging, it was roaring. I woke with a jolt to the insistent vibration of my burner phone against the nightstand. The digital clock on the dusty bedside table read 4:17 a.m. Tessa's name flashed urgently on the screen. "It's happening," she said without preamble, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Turn on any news channel." My fingers fumbled for the remote, clumsy with sleep and a surge of adrenaline. The ancient television in my temporary sanctuary flickered to life, bathing the room in a stark blue light. The scrolling headline at the bottom of the screen sent a jolt through me. "Breaking, multiple outlets report allegations of patient abuse at Rock Creek Behavioral Center." My breath caught in my throat. After weeks of meticulous planning, the synchronized release of our carefully curated evidence packages to 7 different media outlets had worked exactly as intended. "The Washington Times has the financial records," Tessa continued, her voice trembling slightly with controlled excitement. "Channel 9 is running the leaked video footage from Stonemaier. NPR has 3 former employees on record, their voices finally being heard." I watched, mesmerized, as the camera cut to the imposing steps of the Hope Foundation headquarters. Dr. Martin Hale, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, stood behind a podium, sweat beading on his forehead despite the early morning chill. These allegations are completely unfounded," he stammered, his voice wavering as he nervously adjusted his tie. "The Hope Foundation has a 50-year history of compassionate care," a sharp-witted reporter interrupted, her voice cutting through the carefully constructed facade. "Dr. Hale, can you explain these internal memos authorizing the commitment of Dr. Camille Mercer after she reported experimental protocols at Stonemaier Institute?" The camera zoomed in on the damning documents held aloft for the world to see. My foster father's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. Gregory Collins, Chief Financial Officer, Hope Foundation. I turned up the volume as the anchor reported that social media had erupted with the powerful hashtag #RockCreekTruth, as brave former patients began sharing their own long-suppressed experiences. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "State Medical Board just called emergency session for 9:00 a.m. It was working. Outside, the sky began to lighten with the first pale hints of dawn, a fragile symbol of hope breaking through the darkness. I pulled up another news site on my laptop. 3 Rock Creek administrators have been placed on administrative leave. A congressman from the Oversight Committee is calling for a full federal investigation. The seemingly impenetrable system was beginning to crack. I called Margot at exactly 7:05 a.m., adhering to our predetermined schedule. "The night staff is in complete chaos," she reported in a hushed, urgent voice. "Administration ordered all patient files secured, but security is stretched impossibly thin, trying to manage the media circus gathering at the entrance and the flood of frantic family members calling about their loved ones." "Tonight," I told her, my voice firm with resolve. "We move tonight." 16 hours later, the city lights blurred past my windshield as I parked 2 blocks from Rock Creek's dimly lit service entrance. The evening news on the radio reported that Gregory Collins's opulent home was being searched by police, and Dr. Hale had been taken in for questioning. The momentum we had ignited had built far faster than even our most optimistic projections. Margot met me at the employee gate, her face drawn and pale with nervous energy. She pressed a slightly crumpled staff ID badge into my hand. "I've already processed the discharge papers," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the deserted corridor. "Filed them yesterday, before anyone was watching for anything unusual." The hallways were eerily silent, the usual oppressive atmosphere replaced by a palpable tension. Most of the staff had been pulled to manage the escalating media crisis, or to deal with the terrified families demanding answers. "Third floor has minimal supervision tonight," Margot explained, her hand shaking slightly as she swiped her keycard at the elevator. "Everybody's either hiding or destroying evidence." The elevator doors slid open on the 3rd floor with a soft sigh, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic drum as we moved stealthily down the long, sterile corridor, our footsteps muffled by the worn industrial carpeting. Margot paused outside room 317, glancing both ways with a furtive urgency before unlocking the door. Camille sat on the edge of her narrow bed, a small, worn canvas bag packed neatly beside her. Her gray-streaked hair had been carefully combed, and she wore a simple cardigan I had never seen before, over her standard-issue hospital gown. "I knew you'd come today," she said simply, her eyes so strikingly like my own. Clear and focused, the ever-present haze of medication seemingly lifted. The medication schedule, it changed. They're distracted. I crossed the small room in 3 swift steps and took her hands in mine. They were cold, but surprisingly steady. No matter what they did, I told her, surprised by the unwavering steadiness of my own voice. I was always coming back for you. Margot stood watch at the door, her face a mask of tense anticipation. 5 minutes. Shift change. We need to move. We exited through the same anonymous service entrance, Camille walking between us, her steps surprisingly strong. No alarms blared, no security guards challenged us. Only the heavy metal door closing behind us with a muted click that sounded remarkably like freedom. The night air wrapped around us, crisp and sweet compared to the sterile, suffocating staleness of Rock Creek. Camille paused for a moment, tilting her face towards the star-dusted sky. "The Big Dipper," she murmured, a hint of wonder in her voice. I could only ever see one star from my window, never the whole constellation. Yet in the car, as we drove away from that place of shadows, she recited details about my life that she had somehow managed to collect and memorize despite years of chemical restraint and isolation. "You won the 5th grade spelling championship with the word quintessential," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You broke your arm at 12 climbing the maple tree in the backyard. You're allergic to strawberries." Her hand found mine on the console between us, her touch sending a wave of long-suppressed emotion through me. I realized then that she had been collecting these fragmented memories of my life, the way prisoners mark notches on walls, counting the days, desperately preserving her sanity. The late-night news played softly on the radio, the announcer's voice a steady drone. Gregory Collins's carefully constructed reputation was unraveling in real time, as reporters uncovered his pivotal role in multiple improper commitments. And Dr. Hale's legal team has issued a statement distancing him from operational decisions. 3 more Rock Creek administrators have been suspended. The State Attorney General's office announced tonight that a comprehensive investigation into allegations of systematic patient abuse will begin immediately. Meanwhile, attorneys have filed the first-class action lawsuit on behalf of former patients. I switched off the radio, the voices fading into the night. There would be time for justice tomorrow. Tonight was about something else entirely. Camille squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "They thought bearing the truth would make it disappear," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "They forgot that buried things can grow." The headlights cut through the darkness as we drove toward the state line, leaving Rock Creek Behavioral Center behind. Without a backward glance, heading towards a new beginning neither of us had dared to imagine just weeks ago. Some endings, I realized with a profound sense of relief, are really just the truth finally set free. The morning sun spilled across our small kitchen table, illuminating the crossword puzzle Camille worked with steady concentration. A steaming mug of tea cooled at her elbow, the fragrant vapor curling towards the weathered ceiling beams of our rented cottage. A place that, after 6 months in this quiet coastal village, had begun to feel less like a borrowed space and more like home. 23 across, Camille said, tapping her pencil against the newspaper. 6 letters. What was once lost. Found, I answered without looking up from the toast I was buttering, a small smile playing on my lips. Her laugh, a sound that had been rusty and uncertain in those first fragile weeks after Rock Creek, now came easily, a melody of healing. "You didn't even need the clue," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I placed her plate beside the crossword. "Some answers," I replied softly. "I just know." Our cozy cottage sat on the edge of town, where paved roads surrendered to gravel. The windows faced east, a deliberate choice Camille had made, explaining that she had spent 16 years unable to track time through natural light. Now she woke with the sunrise, often before my alarm, and some mornings I would find her simply standing by the window, her palms pressed against the cool glass, watching the world awaken. We use different names now, not elaborate disguises, just subtle shifts, Catherine for Camille, Marie for Maya. Small deflections while the investigations continued, a silent dance with the lingering shadows of the past. The neighbors knew us as the quiet mother and daughter who had moved in last winter. The kind aunt at the bakery saved day-old bread for us, and the friendly librarian recommended novels with happy endings. The medication withdrawal had been the hardest part. 3 grueling months of tremors and memory gaps. Nights when Camille would wake screaming from nightmares she couldn't fully articulate. I had kept careful notes in our shared journal, good days marked in blue ink, difficult ones in black. Slowly, steadily, the entries grew bluer. "Tell me again about my 3rd birthday," I said one morning, watching her hands. Once so unsteady, now move with a quiet purpose as she filled in 7 across. Camille set down her pencil, her gaze softening. "You wore yellow overalls, insisted on them, even though it was November." Her eyes focused on something beyond the sun-drenched kitchen walls, a memory taking shape. "You carried that stuffed rabbit everywhere. Hoppy, he had 1 ear chewed off." A small smile touched her lips. "I baked chocolate cupcakes with strawberry frosting because you couldn't decide between the two. You ate the frosting first, then the cake. Methodical, even then." Each recovered memory felt like a piece of restitution, a small victory in our ongoing battle to reclaim what had been stolen. We were building a bridge across 16 years of lost time, plank by fragile plank. The television murmured softly in the corner, the volume low. Camille still flinched at sudden loud noises. The morning news showed Dr. Hale being escorted from his foundation offices, his face shielded by an upraised hand. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. "Investigation expands to 3 states." "They found the records in Connecticut," Camille said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. I didn't ask how she knew. Tessa kept us informed through secure channels, though we had never revealed our exact location. Her tireless exposés had just won a National Journalism Award. Gregory Collins now faced 13 criminal charges. The state medical board had suspended 6 psychiatrist licenses. A congressional hearing on institutional psychiatric abuse was scheduled to begin next month. The notification chime on my laptop sounded from the other room. Camille raised a questioning eyebrow. "Another survivor," I explained, retrieving the computer. Tessa had been sending encrypted messages for weeks, connecting the scattered pieces of a much larger, much more sinister puzzle. "Claire Rothman," Camille whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. "She was at Stonemeyer, before me. They said she killed herself." "Very much alive," I said, turning the screen so she could read the message. "You did what you couldn't. We're organizing testimony for the hearings. No pressure to join, but your statement would matter." The number at the bottom of the message was staggering. 53 former patients had connected through their secure channel, each story echoing fragments of Camille's own horrific experience. Brilliant women who had dared to question powerful men, only to vanish behind diagnoses manufactured to silence them. Later that evening, we walked along the windswept shoreline as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Camille's steps were stronger now, her frame less fragile. She pulled a faded photograph from the pocket of her jacket, the one she had kept hidden inside her copy of Jane Eyre in the Rock Creek Library for 16 long years. In it, I sat on her lap. No more than 2 years old, both of us laughing at something just beyond the camera's frame. "I always felt something was missing," I admitted, watching the waves gently erase our footprints in the sand. Even before I found the documents, Camille slipped her hand into mine, her touch a silent reassurance. "They could take everything else," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon, "but they couldn't erase that. Valuable lesson. The human spirit possesses an incredible resilience, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. The courage to speak out against injustice, even in the face of overwhelming power, can ignite a chain reaction that leads to profound change and healing. Never underestimate the power of connection and shared experience in the fight for what is right. What are your thoughts on this story? Please share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling narratives.